everyone.
Morning.
Good morning.
How are you all?
Hello.
Good, thanks.
So welcome to the 5th Annual Creativity and Culture Conference. My name is Dr. Jasveer Mahil. I know all of you, but I'm not sure if you've all had an opportunity to meet each other. So maybe if I could ask you to just briefly introduce yourself. So for the purpose of the others who you may not have met yet. So let me start with you, Barbara.
Okay, thank you, Jasveer, and thank you for inviting me to this. So, hi everybody. Just very, very briefly, I'm English. I'm living in France for 27 years now. I'm an executive coach now and creativity facilitator. I started my work in creativity back in '91 and have been working quite a lot with creative problem solving, as well as using creativity in personal development. So to keep it brief, I think that's
brilliant.
Hopefully
yeah,
that's enough.
Yes, and Barbara, I've spoken with you several years, and maybe this is the third time. I'm not sure if it's the second or third time, but so you're one of the regulars. So Chris is a long-time friend of mine. So Chris, if you could please introduce yourself to the rest of the panel.
Yeah, I'm Chris. I've been involved in my local community for quite a long time. I chair the Friends of a Local Nature Reserve, and I run or help run a local startup business which is involved with gardening and with recycling and the circular economy. And also I met Jasveer through Toastmasters, which we were both members of in Birmingham here. And generally, I'm retired now, so I am also involved in the health economy as a patient representative. So I have quite an interest in well-being as well as community building.
Okay, thank you very much, Chris. So yes, we've known each other for about 7 or 8 years, perhaps even longer than that. So it's great. Paolo, Italian friend of mine. So please introduce yourself to the others.
Hi to all, I'm Jasveer. Yeah, my background is in advertising. I work as a creative advertising person for 25 years. And then I switched to consultancy for creativity innovation using both CPS, creative problem solving methodologies, and actually I'm a marketing and communication director in a company, in a factory. So I switched to the very practical mode, making things instead of making ideas. I mean, it works. And I'm also a consultant of creativity and leadership training and coaching. And we are just starting our creative conference on next Wednesday in Italy, and this is Crea Conference. Maybe some of you knows it, and we will have the 18th edition after 1 year and a half. Let's say almost 2 years that we were closed as the whole world, I think. So I'm involved in creativity as a practitioner and also as a student.
Okay, thank you very much, Paolo. It was a pleasure to meet you for the first time this year. Now, Alan, I've known for several years, and this is not the first time that Alan has participated in the conference. Alan is based in Singapore. If you could please introduce yourself to the rest of the panel, Alan.
Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Alan, and I am an American living in Singapore. I work for Singapore Management University. Here at the university, I manage a change-making program. So it's a program that's designed to help our students become creative makers of change. I have an interest in arts-based pedagogy and creativity. And in terms of my own career, I do teaching, I do educational research, and more I see myself moving into the direction of instructional design.
Thank you very much, Alan. And Phil, I've known Phil for more than 10 years because we met in London when we were both part of a business network. So Phil, please introduce yourself to the rest of the panel.
Hi, thanks very much, Jasveer. Well, I've had an extremely varied career in business. I've spent most of my life building businesses from scratch, usually in pioneering situations. I've had health food manufacturing companies. I run an advertising, marketing and PR agency. And now I also trained as a psychotherapist and hypnotherapist, which was much more recent. But I'm also a director and founder of a software company called ThoughtSpace, which has developed software to help solve the world's problems. A small ambition, but it seems to be working. So I'm very pleased about that.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Phil. And Richard is another regular at these creativity and culture conferences. I think it must be the second, or at least the second, or possibly the third time that you're participating in the conference, Richard.
Yep, it's the third time. So good to be here.
Nice to have you.
My background is design and brand consultancy. So that's my world, a bit like Paolo and Phil in terms of advertising and communication. But I think what's probably particularly relevant at the moment is I'm working on a project with Imperial College London to develop a new branding model, which uses multiple archetypes. And in our world, often brands are said to have one personality, one narrative. And I've been looking at creating some software and modeling tools to map brands' multiple personalities and multiple narratives. And so that's, yeah. And so I'm very much into the behavioral psychology. My company is Emotional Branding, and that's all about how emotions drive people's behaviors and how we connect with those.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much, Richard. So at the bottom of your screen, you can all see where it says reactions. And there's, if you click on reactions, there's an icon for raising your hand. So my purpose as being the host for this panel is to make sure that the discussion flows and that everyone gets a chance to speak and that we finish on time. We're planning on this discussion lasting till 11 o'clock. So if you have something to say in response to what somebody's already said, could you please raise your hand, because that will help me to know who to call on next. But we've all had private individual conversations about the creative power of stories. And from the conversations that I've had with each one of you, we all agree that stories are incredibly powerful, and each one of you has a different approach to this. So let me start with this question about, well, why is it that stories can have so much power and influence on us? So who would like to speak first about that?
I don't mind starting off with an example of how stories link us together and add value to objects. In that, I was watching one of these antique valuation programs, and they produced a large globe which was made out of cardboard, had seen better days, and was really quite damaged. And of course, just to look at it as an object, it would hardly have any value at all. And then the consultant said, "This is the globe that was used by the leaders of the invasion of France during the Second World War. This is what they used to do their planning with." And suddenly, this battered globe suddenly took on quite a lot of value, and the commentator said that if you have an object and you have a story attached to it, then it increases its value quite by multiple times. So a story suddenly sheds light on objects and can connect people together by having a common background and connect them to the object through the story. So they just illustrated to me how important story is when you're wanting to communicate and connect with other people.
Thank you. Phil, your comments?
Well, just going on from what Christopher said, a really good example of that is religious icons. So throughout history, certainly in the Christian world, particularly Catholicism, they've used, I say they've used, they have actually used objects purporting to be bits of the cross or of the crown of thorns or something like that, to pull in, sorry to be cynical, punters from miles around to their churches, and it's always been the story, extremely powerful, emotionally attached stories to objects. So yes, I agree, Christopher, that it can be incredibly powerful.
Okay, thanks. And Richard?
Yeah, I'm going to very much come from the physiological point of view. It just feels good to tell stories, and it feels good to hear them. And we're sort of programmed to respond to stories. And I think throughout history, it's been our main way of learning, adapting, growing, sharing knowledge. And it's been fundamental to the human species and how we've evolved. The ability to tell stories is just part of who we are. And it's said, and I think it's totally accurate, the stories that we tell define who we are. You know, we become our own stories after a while. So I think we just have to look at it from a physiological point of view, and from there it just explodes. You know, it just feels good.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and Paolo?
Oh, yeah, building on what you previously said, I think that actually if we observe what we are doing now here, we are using stories. And so this is the example in this experiment that it works. You know, as Richard already, it's good to stay here together, to hear and to listen to other people, and also to tell story like tales. So we are using stories in order to, think about stories. And another thing I think that using stories asked us and our audience to use their imagination. And so when we put here, we just move from this reality into different reality. And it's kind of being, at a movie. We all stay there looking at this thing, but we incorporate the story as we are. So we interpreted the story, and it's just, I like what you said, Richard. It's about it's a physiological state and things, to stay there. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And Barbara?
Yeah, thank you. I'd also pick up on both those, in fact, all the points that have gone on before. What came up for me when, was it, who started the conversation? I can't remember. Chris, sorry. When Chris first started, was I immediately thought about the sort of personal side of it, and how creating our story can create a confidence in us. And I'm interested in both the personal side and the organizational side, in terms of how stories can change, how we can use stories for change. And that if we've grown up with a story that hasn't given us confidence, then we can recreate that story with help often, but we can recreate it later on in our lives to become more confident. And I think that I see this a lot in that people, particularly when they move countries, and I think I talked to Jasvir about this, when a lot of people who've come from England to France, for example, particularly over the last few years, have almost kind of created a new story around themselves. It's almost like a new identity they've taken on. So I'm quite, and I love the physiological side. Yes, it's fun. I write short stories once a month in a writing circle. And I love letting my imagination flow in creating those stories. So yeah, I love the sort of intertwining of that imagination, but also the seriousness with which we can create ourselves and recreate ourselves often we need help with that, but we can do that.
Thank you. And Alan?
Yeah, I think what has been said previously does resonate with me. I do look at storytelling on 3 different levels. There is the individual level, the cultural level, and then the humanistic level. And I think at the individual level, I do agree that, you know, we do tell ourselves, you know, we do put ourselves as we have a certain role for ourselves in our own stories, and often you know, how we see ourselves does play a role in shaping what we become. And often, you know, whether or not we realize that we are employing creativity, whether it's in a positive or in a negative way. Regarding the storytelling at a cultural level, there is this saying, I think it comes from Christina Baldwin, and she says, words are how we think, but stories are how we link. And I think each culture has a different way of teaching an individual to be a good person and a lot of these cultures will use storytelling to achieve that ends. And so, for example, you know, in the Chinese tradition, we have Fa Mulan, which is a story that's a very ancient story that's been retold in many different ways, and it's been popularized by Disney, and it emphasizes, you know, the values of, you know, loyalty, bravery, and truth. You know, a woman who's able to sacrifice herself, you know, because she wants to be true to her family and to herself and to her own destiny. So there's that component of stories. You know, they teach us, you know, how we could be. They give us a model of what is possible. But I think at a universal level, I do subscribe to this idea of the hero's journey, which has been talked about by Joseph Campbell. And this, you know, it doesn't matter if you're talking about Muhammad or Jesus or Buddha or Harry Potter or Luke Skywalker. It's really the same story about human beings. It's a story about transformation, about change, how you become an adult, how you go about and make a difference, and how you change yourself and the world in the process. And so from that respect, it's you know, storytelling and the hero's journey plays a very important role in our own creative thinking process. Yeah.
Okay. Paolo, do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, actually, I was thinking about these 3 different levels, and it's you know, how it resonates differently also to people, how you can share it and build and make people change. You know, you talk about transformation and change, how around the same story we can develop a different way of being, kind of, you know, radial thinking and radial feeling. And it's quite interesting. So it reminds to me, like, the, you know, in brainstorming or just in creative thinking, the divergent side of the moment, in which you just add things, add yourself, and you build on other people ideas like this. So it's interesting how, I mean, it's, let's say it's the same old story as you Alan, as you said. By the way, we renew it all the time that we hear it and all the time that we use it.
Okay, Phil?
But I think it's interesting to examine why we think stories are so powerful. I think that I think we're hardwired to listen to stories because they were the main form of entertainment while human beings were evolving around the campfire. The only entertainment there was for someone to tell a story, and I think that we are literally, our brains are hardwired to listen and absorb stories and to tell stories. And I think from a psychological point of view, this is where the power lies in, and also the danger. So it was said earlier that, you know, we could be the subject of the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves, and this is where psychotherapists will help people to perhaps reinvent the stories that they've created for themselves if they're not very powerful. So you can disempower yourself with negative stories, but you can also reverse that by empowering yourself with positive stories. And I find that a particularly interesting aspect of the subject. I also think that there's a danger with the medium that we use. Instead of listening to someone around a campfire, we're now mesmerized, quite literally, by screens. And we get so absorbed in film on TV that it's to the exclusion of all else. In fact, there's a lot of research been done that proves that just a few seconds after turning on a television screen, the parts of our brain that are to do with creativity shut down. So you're only able to absorb, and you're not allowed. Your brain actually shuts off from the parts that can be truly critical, which is one of the reasons why television advertising is so incredibly powerful.
Mm-hmm. Right. Thank you, Phil. Richard?
Yeah, I think what's something that's come, I just want to take it a little bit further or deeper in my own observations or my own study, which is this conflict of narratives within ourselves to help us grow. And you talked about the hero's journey, but it's become obvious to me that we don't just have one narrative. We're not just one personality. We are these multiple facets, fragments, and they're always in conflict. And it's this tension between our basic human needs, the need for certainty, the need for uncertainty, for love and connection, for self, ego, awareness, strength. All of this is always in conflict. And the term entrapped mind is what we are. We're constantly looking for meaning in this world. And it's not a coincidence that the people in this panel are all communicators, change makers, creators, because we're looking to create new meaning, discover new ways to connect. And it's this, for me, this concept that we have multiple stories within us. And it's the tension between these multiple stories and the archetypes that surround these stories that we're constantly working through to evolve and grow as an individual and as a society and as a culture. And that's fundamentally why brand advertising marketing follows it. It follows the money, and the money's in a story. So
okay, thank you, Richard. Barbara?
Thank you. There's a couple of points I wanted to pick up on from earlier. I think something Phil was saying that was about stories being entertainment, and yeah, I mean that's how history got passed on initially, how our history is sort of developed by, and we pick up that from our families, that we pick up on the stories, who were the heroes in our families' lives and who were the villains. What was it they did to create that sort of sense of either being a hero or a villain? I think every family has that sort of, the archetypal uncle who was the villain or whoever he was. So that interests me really about what sort of influence it has on us as we grow up. And I just wanted I've also kind of connected there with the whole thing about, and I'm sorry to throw this in on a nearly all male panel, but the sort of female versus male stories that happen in the world. And as a woman growing up in the 70s, well, I started my career in the 70s, it was in a very male-dominated world. It still is in executive coaching in an incredibly male-dominated world. So not a lot has changed. And I think that causes a lot of issues for women on what are our stories? How do we create stories that fit in with this other world around us? And I find that quite fascinating. And the whole thing about stories empower and disempower. When stories are being told and it's about the male world, then how disempowering is that for the women in it? And I don't want to kind of throw this in. It's Saturday morning and it's a lovely sunny day here, and I'm not throwing it in to cause a great feminist argument, but I think it's kind of a flag that needs to be raised sometimes. Thank you.
I think it's an important point, Barbara, because stories do need space, and there are stories that there's lots and lots of space available for those stories to be heard, and there's other stories that tend to be suppressed. So I think it's a very valid point. And Paolo, comments, please?
Yeah, I want to be, I mean, this was another flag, and I'm just a step, beyond. Yeah, and this, and it's about the multiple stories. And also, if we can switch this multiple stories concept into what Barbara just said, it's about how the multiple stories can be adapted to the, male, female, or just villains and heroes and everything. And it I thought about this thing about how we manage polarities. That is just this, infinite loop of just having these two blocks, one versus the other. And also, for me, is I really love working with paradoxes. That is something that if you put this into stories, makes people just be surprised and see the reality from, what you said before. It's they entrap our mind. And I really thank Barbara to raise the gender issue that is also an entrapping mind story for us. As I was thinking when you were talking about this, that executives are so much more males than female right now, and just in my mind, just open up a pop-up that said, oh, it is better to be a man, coaching or training a female executive, or it's better to be a woman to train this woman executive. So this female executive. So it's a new story for me. This is a question that's raised from your point of view, because maybe, this is about polarities. Again, it's something that you can't solve, but you need to manage. And this is linked to what Richard was saying about the multiple stories, the tension. I feel this tension as creative when I'm in that. I mean, not so much times, but when I'm so lucky to be in that flow, that I'm in the middle of this big tension, like in the loop, in the center of the infinite loop. I'm there, and this is where polarities, paradoxes, and this is the real life, but being aware of being there, you can switch, but tension is high, and it's energy. Thank you.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you. I think, Barbara, you raise a very important point, and I think there's also a political element to storytelling, and there is this question of whose story gets told, and often in the course of history. And I grew up in an American education system, and I understand very well that often the people my ancestors never their stories were never taught to me in an American history class, even though they did come from China to the States, and they opened businesses, and they built the railroad and all of that. But a lot of those stories don't get told. There are certain stories that are just outright lies, like the story of Columbus. It's to deal, because people cannot handle the guilt that and they don't want to tell the children the truth. American literature tends to be, we tend to honor rugged individualism. But if you look at the course of history, we have had quite the opposite of that. We had the institution of slavery, and we even wrote there was even a Bible that was specifically written to, for slaves, with a cynical attempt to, not just to control them, but to further sever them from their ancestral cultures. So I do want to say that there is a dark side to storytelling, and stories can be used, in an abusive and oppressive way to nationalize, to stir up prejudices. So I do want to say that there, I did want to point that out. The second thing regarding complexity of stories, I think often, we have this sort of Disney princess sort of syndrome, right, where you can see yourself as the fairy tale princess, but but never are we going to see ourselves as the wicked stepmother or the wicked witch. We don't, And that's the same thing can be said about, you know, my country, the United States. We like to see ourselves as the princess, but you know, we have done some very oppressive things, and you know, we didn't get to where we are now by being nice to people. So yeah, so it's, you know, and I think there's also this element of psychological projection, right? There's parts of yourself that you want to own and keep to yourself, but you don't want to. There's stuff about yourself, you know, you pin it onto another country or somebody that you don't like. And so sometimes in our way of creating stories, I think there are some psychological projections that we need to be aware of, and we need to be mindful that sometimes, you know, we are whole beings, and sometimes, you know, there's the stuff that we like to tell. You know, we have our light, but also stories reveal the shadow of ourselves as well.
Yeah, thank you, Phil.
Well, I really want to echo what Alan was saying. In terms of history is written by the winners of wars, isn't it? And in the conversation I had with Jasveer, we talked about truth and how do you get to truth when an example is when there's a car accident in the high street, you might have 20 different witnesses, and you'll have 20 different interpretations of the truth of what happened. So history it's very difficult to get to the truth of history, but one thing that is true is that the people who own the media, whatever it might be, I mean, throughout history, the people who told the stories, the winners, if you like, were highly manipulative and just told people what they wanted people to hear. The truth went way out of the window. So yeah, stories have a very black side, I mean, now we've got this this problem with echo chambers on Facebook and social media, where people are telling stories and then only listening to other people's stories that fit with their own, because of algorithms that put them all together. So again, you can't get to the truth there. So again, there's a dark side to it, but there's very much a plus side to it. But I think that's the plus side of stories is more at a personal level. It's to do with the stories that we tell ourselves. We can also filter. Obviously, we've got the filter mechanism. When we choose what to watch on Netflix, for instance, do we watch something that's violent, or do we watch something that's intriguing, or what is it that appeals to us at the time? And I think, again, we need to be aware that what we're influenced by might not be, we can be influenced in so many ways without realizing it, because a lot of the stories that we listen to, the messages in the stories, which we talked about, the hero and so on, the messages in the stories can often be hidden from our conscious minds. They just go straight into our subconscious minds. Which is another story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, excellent. Thank you, Phil. Chris?
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about the origins of stories. It was hinted at the very beginning of the conversation that all stories arise from change. And in the Joseph Campbell model, for instance, it's the calling of the hero into a challenge that is being set. And even at the level of a novel, they all start out with some kind of crisis or some kind of challenge to the protagonist. So stories are there about change, and that's been hinted at all around. Also, I was this idea of of women's place in storytelling. Traditionally, again on the Joseph Campbell model, it's usually the woman who is the wise person who initiates the protagonist in some secret or some advice that changes their lives. And there are quite a few women now rewriting the stories of old. So, I mean, if you look at Pat Barker or Sue Miller, who are rewriting the Iliad from a woman's point of view, there is and Toni Morrison, who's writing about the Black experience in America, that there is a counter movement to what you've been saying. I also wanted to cite a new author called Angus Fletcher, who's both a neurologist and a student of literature, who is advocating 10 minutes a day to either read a story or Phil, to watch it on television, and says that this helps people to escape from their immediate troubles and get a wider perspective on life. And he said it's both good for your creativity and for your mental health. So the idea of story as not just something that warms your heart, it's also something that is good for you. And we are pattern-seeking creatures. So stories help us to put a pattern, and we're also creatures who seek meaning. So it gives us both a pattern and a meaning on what is often chaotic experience. So I think from what the conversation's been going, there lots of great points being raised, and often at the end of it all, the story is the answer.
And I suppose that you said earlier on about, I think it was Phil that was saying that stories were often used for entertainment, but stories can also be essential ways of communicating for survival. Like in the past, we knew what to do and what not to do in order to survive. And this is a way like stories can pass on knowledge from one generation to the other. We didn't have any other means of communicating apart from the stories passed on through our ancestors. So any comments from the rest of you about these different purposes of stories? Like, you know, we've talked about entertainment, we've talked about survival, we've talked about the fact that there is a dark side to stories, that they can be used to manipulate. And who is the other? Who is the enemy in the stories? Recently, I was reading a book that my father read about maybe 40 years ago, and he read it in Punjabi, and I can't read Punjabi, and so therefore I didn't know what he was reading at the time. But now it's been translated into English, and I read it, and I can really see why he liked that story, because it totally resonated with his values. So Barbara, go ahead. I see you have your hand raised. Do you have a comment?
Thank you. It was just something, in fact, it was prompted by listening to what Chris had to say, because I was thinking about this whole thing about writing stories. So we tell stories and we hear stories, and I think they're very powerful in the whole socialization process, socialization as children, then into working life, grow, as adults, and we can recreate stories in our heads and then live them. But I think one of the powerful ways in which we can make sense of our world is by writing the stories. And I like the idea of, not just reading for 10 minutes a day, and I try and read for longer than that, and to read a sort of different genre, not the same all the time, but also to write the stories. And I use story writing as a way of almost fictionalizing my own memories. So I can catch on to something that's happened to me in the past, and then I create a story around it that often turns out quite amusing. So I've never thought of that until just now. I haven't thought about that as serving a purpose. As I think it through now, I think that's serving a great purpose in not just making sense of my own life, but helping me work through those things that were difficult. It's brought a lightness to that is very pleasing as well. I just wanted to say that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Barbara. Paolo?
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I'm going back to the question about knowledge and entertainment, and working in advertising for so many years. We thought how to use creativity to move products from the shelf into the car, into the cart of people. And this is about persuading people to do something, to take action. So if we think about, how stories and entertaining people when you tell story, it's about you can make them do something. You persuade them to memorize it, and this is much more better than to study. As we know that we can. It's not the way in which we teach, but it's in the way that we make them learn. So this is the kind of different things, because as coming from advertising or from persuasion world, you got to take care of your target, of the people you are talking to, in order to make this story be memorized, be remembered, and turn into knowledge. So this is, again, I'm just linking to the polarities. It's a difference between teaching and learning, and also about telling and be heard and be listened to. So again, stories as also this other level that is made by people who listen to this. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm sorry, I just have to leave the conference for a couple of minutes.
Okay, all right, Phil. And Alan, go ahead, please.
Sure. Yeah, so I do teach the hero's journey in some of my courses when I have, sometimes I have students coming in from places like Japan or China, or sometimes I teach the hero's journey to students here. And what the hero's journey is about is, it's about going into the great unknown, and you don't know you don't know the answer to the problem, and you have to learn your way through it, and you have to discover, and you have to be able to respond in the moment. And so there's a lot of leadership that has to be learned. So the hero's journey, it is a lesson, and it's taught in virtually all traditions about how to go through life, and how to live your life in a way that is courageous, that is in line with the things that you are passionate about, and how to live with maybe a sense of doing something out of a sense of love, like Mulan had for her parents and for her society. And so it's a very there's something that's very, very beautiful about the hero's journey. I do have students reflect in a journal, and they have to they take these post-it notes, so that I teach them the different parts of the cycle. And so they when they review their journal, they have to take these post-it notes, and then they have to write down where they are in the hero's journey as they review their journals. And I assess them in that way, so that they understand that this is their journey. But I think as an educator, it's very important for me to provide experiences that provoke transformation. And what I think is important to do is you give people a possibility to try out, and they try out a certain possibility. Maybe they act on a stage as a certain change maker or whatever, and then they see what they learn from it, and if they like it, they can keep that aspect for themselves. If they don't like it, they just put it back on the rack. It's like you're shopping for clothes, that sort of thing. But I think the hero's journey is something. It's about human transformation. It's about trying on a possibility and doing it with a sense of courage. And I think there's something that is very universal and very pivotal. It's a very pivotal part of the human experience, and that's why I think the hero's journey, resonates so strongly, across the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm glad that you've related it to education, because I think any really truly meaningful education program needs to be similar to a hero's journey, in that it needs to culminate in some sort of transformation. Unless there's some sort of transformation, can we really say that any learning has taken place? Richard, go ahead, please.
Yeah, I was just reflecting, listening to all the stories and how people share them, and how my body was reacting to them. I think individually we all share and tell stories with different roles in mind. And it just made me wonder whether, or how I reflect upon how, as I get older, stories change within me. My role as a storyteller changes. If I think back to when I was younger, it was about solutions, it was about direction, it was about impressing, whereas now it's more like bouncing a very light ball around the room. It's got a lightness to it. It's not heavy, it's not structured, it flows. And I just wondered whether or not psychologically, physiologically, in our brains, in our bodies, we adapt in our ability to tell stories in different ways as we get older. We talked about the wise woman and the wise man, and yeah, it just made me interested, in that sort of, that sense of can our ability to tell stories change as we get older? I just thought that was an interesting question to ask other people, really.
Yeah, Richard, it was like in the olden days, the elders were always the storytellers, and we know that in the modern day, leaders are meant to be good storytellers, and that's what elders did. Elders were the storytellers. They were the leaders because they were the best storytellers. Or they had.
Does something change in us, though? That's what's interesting me. Do we grow an ability that we don't have when we're young to tell stories in a different way because because we reflect on things more, because we digest it, we're aware. I don't know. I was just intrigued by that, because I sense in myself listening, to the people in the room, and it's almost the more senior the person in the room, the elder, the tone of their storytelling changes from just listening to people in this session. So.
Yeah, and Chris, I've known Chris for so many years, and he's an excellent storyteller. And Chris always reminds me of one of those wise elders. Go ahead, Chris. Do you have a comment on that?
Well, I was responding to something that was said a bit earlier, that in rhetoric we have what they call the commonplace. That is, you try and find who your audience is, and then work out common experiences they have, and refer your speech into what they will have experienced communally. And I think a point about stories is that we're not alone. That when the storyteller starts, he talks about stuff that we all experience. I mean, we all experience fear. We all experience being, if not depressed, at least discouraged. And there's these common experiences we have, which the great writers and the great communicators are able to touch upon. So just to take the last point that Richard made was, if you look at someone like Dickens and his Great Expectations, David Copperfield, he is an older man looking back on his youth and from his vantage point, putting it into perspective. So I think stories do have this universal appeal that it draws us all into one unified humanity, and even if it's written in a foreign tongue, there's still that nub of common experience.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Barbara?
Thank you. Just a short comment on something that I think it was Alan said, was it Alan? I can't remember now, sorry. A couple of threads, a couple of talks away, that talking about elders and their value in, no, it was Richard, sorry. Richard, you were saying that as we get older, do we tell stories? I'm just thinking my memory's going as I get older. Maybe it's too long an hour for me. But maybe our storytelling is different as we get older. I didn't want to particularly reflect on that, although I would say that probably as you get older, you've got a whole host more of stories behind you and of history behind you. And younger people will not have lived through some of those years. So I work with but I share stories with a woman who's 20 years younger than I am. And when I talk about some of the incidents that I've lived through in my life and some of the times, this is not in her experience at all. And so it's quite interesting that for me, I'm thinking, oh, everybody knows about that. Whereas for her, it's fresh and it's different and it's a new way of looking at the world. But what it also brought up for me is that who are the storytellers online now? And I'm thinking about people like influencers on Instagram who've become incredibly powerful. And a lot of them are very young people with not very much experience. And they have masses of followers. So it's like, okay, what's going on there? Is this a total change? Is it just a phenomenon that's happening now? You look at something like, I don't look at it, but I've never looked at it, but I've seen people share things from TikTok. And same thing there. It's mostly young people, and it's mostly young people sharing their stories or sharing something. So I don't know. I think I've just come to the conclusion that I don't know. I would have said, as you get older, you've got such a wealth of stories behind you that it can be more interesting. And we might want to share that more because it helps us with making sense of our history and where we are now. However, we need to contrast that with what's happening in society out there with these younger people, the influencers, creating stories that are having a strong influence. And it could be that's also happening on social media generally.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Barbara. Paolo? Oh.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I think that now you can hear me, but you can. Thinking about the social media, about TikTok, Instagram, it's a reflection about the message and the medium, and that's unfortunately, as the elders, let's say we didn't have this opportunity to be so famous because of the media lacking at our in our era, let's say. And one thing that really it's intriguing me is about how they can build this phenomenon of thinking about they are so powerful. They know this new language because we are talking about young people. They don't have the experience, but they build creatively an experience into using the media. So they got the opportunity to be spread all over the world and also into the galaxy. And I think that they are teaching, they are showing us a new way of exploration. And what if, as the more aged or just let's say the wiser ones, we will learn again from this. It's a great opportunity for us, in order to learn what they are doing and how they are doing this, building this kind of new way of talking to people. They are influenced, they can influence, they can persuade, and we know that they can make disasters versus they can build a new wiser world. So as the storytellers, how can we change again, transform ourselves into people that will help them to build this in a proper way, more ethical maybe, and this is a big question for me because I got at 19 years old daughter, and this is the real. It's not a fight anymore among between our generation. It's about how can we collaborate creatively. This is, again, I'm a little bit tired because of my age, not so much energy, but, you know, question raisings arising, and oh my God, I'm really, you know, intrigued by this. You know, this is my new youth can be.
Mhm.
Thank you.
Yeah, building stories between the stories, you know, from our generation and the stories of those who are emerging into adulthood. Thank you. Richard?
Yeah, I was just reflecting on this, the difference between fast thinking and slow thinking, shallow thinking and deep thinking. And stories, in a way, force us to go deep, because, and that's an elder. It's that sort of, there's a longevity, there is a duration to telling a story, which becomes deep. Whereas a TikTok is within 3 seconds, it's limited, it's that shallow, it's that quick. And it doesn't mean that one's necessarily right or wrong, that they've just got different qualities. But I think there is a quality to a deep story where you have time to reflect, to absorb, for your body to transform into that role, into that character, to explore things in terms of how you experience it from a different perspective, as opposed to a shallow TikTok moment. So, and I think that's what I was maybe just observing then in this maturity, in this elderly, which is that longevity of a story.
Yeah, absolutely. And Phil?
Well, I think that this generation, this new generation that have born into social media, the social media world, can all be storytellers. I mean, we've most of our lives we've been, in the main, I would suggest, listeners to stories or watchers of film, or but the number of people now who are actually telling stories and getting their stories out there are almost infinite, and it's because of the internet, because of the, you know, what we have. But again, I absolutely agree that the depth of the stories are very, in most cases, very shallow, because of the shortness of them, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's very interesting to observe. In my case, because I've got this involvement in this software, which is about, it's all to help people think more deeply and widely about stuff. I'm kind of immersed in this world, and realize that a huge number of decisions are made with very little thought. I mean, how often do you see a headline saying, "Oh, well, they didn't think it through"? So I'm on a mission to help people think it through.
Mm-hmm.
But again, it's all to, when it comes to stories. I mean, I read a lot, and there's a huge difference between writers' ability to think deeply and widely about subjects. And the ones that are enduring are the ones that have a fair amount of complexity, with a simple theme running through it, like the hero, or I prefer to say the heroine, having listened to Barbara.
Yeah, thank you very much, Phil. So Chris, it's just coming up to the hour now. So if I could just have like a final comment from you, Chris.
I was just, my grandson is on TikTok, he's 15, or he was, he's grown out of it now. But it reflects Western culture in that the stuff he does and his contemporaries is pure Marx Brothers knockabout humor. Whereas there are other, as you were talking about slow thinking, there are young adult novels as well, like Hunger Games, which he reads. And so side by side with all this throwaway culture like TikTok, there is also a more profound movement among the young to look at longer and deeper stories.
Thank you very much, Chris. Well, thank you, everyone. This has been a fascinating conversation, and hopefully we'll be able to continue these conversations. Following the conference, we always meet every Saturday at 7 o'clock. Chris will tell you, like for the past years, we've been meeting at 7 o'clock and also at 10 o'clock for those like Alan who are based in the Australias and the Singapore and the New Zealand region. So we have 2 sessions. I know Richard has joined the 10 o'clock session on one occasion previously, haven't you, Richard? So 10 o'clock, 7 o'clock. Let me know if you'd like to be a part of that, because there's so much more to be said about stories, and through these conversations we can, as we've been talking about, start to go deeper and wider and become more complex in terms of our understanding about it. Thanks, everyone. I look forward to seeing you again very soon. Bye for now.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Ciao.